She was untamed as a desert wind, supple and dangerous as a panther. She came close to him, heedless of his great blade, dripping with blood. Her supple thigh brushed against it, so close she came to the tall warrior, and her red lips parted as she stared up into his somber, menacing eyes. "Who are you?" "By Ishtar, I've never seen your like. Though I have ranged the sea from the coast of Zingara to the fires of the ultimate south. Whence do you come?" "From Argos," he answered shortly, alert for treachery. Let her slim hand move toward the jeweled dagger in her girdle, and a buffet of his open hand would stretch his senselessness on the deck. Yet in his heart, he did not want to fear. He had held too many women, civilized or barbaric, in his iron-throwed arms, not to recognize the light that burned in the eyes of this one. "You're fierce and hard as a gray wolf. Those eyes were never dimmed by city lights. Those softened marble walls. I am Conan, a Cimmerian." To the people of the exotic climes, the North was a mazy half, a mythical realm, peopled with ferocious blue-eyed giants who occasionally descended from their icy fastness with torch and sword. Their raids had not taken them as far south as Shem, and as daughter of Shem made no distinction between Asir, Vanir, or Cimmerian. And with the unearning instinct of the elemental feminine, she knew she had found her lover, and his race of men meant naught, save it were invested with him in the glamour of far lands. "I am a queen. I am Belit. Look at me, Conan. I am Belit, queen of the Black Coast. O tiger of the north, you are cold as the snowy mountain which bred you. Go with me to the end of the earth, and at the ends of the sea. I am a queen by fire and steel and slaughter. Be thou my king." And his eyes swept the blood-stained ranks, seeking expression of wrath or jealousy. He saw none. The fury was gone from the faces, and he realized that these men, Belit, was more than a woman, a goddess whose will was unquestioned. And he glanced at the Argus, swallowing in the crimson sea wash, heeling far over, her decks awash, held up by the grappling irons. And he glanced at the blue-fringed shore, at the far green hazes of the ocean, at the vibrant figure which stood before him, and his barbaric soul stirred within him. To quest these shining blue realms with that white-skinned young tiger cat, to laugh and wander and pillage. He grunted, shaking the red drops from his blade. As Conan sat with the black against his poop rail, while the old shaman attended the cuts of his hands and limbs, the cargo of the ill-fated Argus was quickly shifted aboard the Tigris and stored in small cabins below deck. Bodies of the crew, the fallen pirates, were cast overboard to the swarming sharks, while wounded blacks were laid in the waist and bandaged. Then the grappling irons were cast off, and as the Argus sank silently into the blood-flecked waters, the Tigris moved off southward to the rhythmic clack of the oars. And they moved out over the glassy blue deep. Belit came. Her eyes were burning like those of a she-panther in the dark. She tore off her ornaments, her sandals, her silken girdle. Rising on tiptoe, arms stretched upwards, quivering, she cried in a desperate horde. "Wolves of the blue sea, beyond ye now, dance, molting dance of Belit, whose fathers were kings of Ascalon." And she danced, like the spin of a desert whirlwind, like the leaping of a quenchless flame, like the urge of creation and the urge of death. And her white feet spurned the blood-stained deck, and dying men forgot death as they gazed frozen upon her. And then as the white stars glimmered through the blue velvet dusk, making her whirling body a blue form of ivory, With a wild cry, she threw herself at Conan, and the blindfold of the Cimmerian fell off. Part 2. The Black Lotus. The Tigris ranged the sea, and the black villages shuddered. Tom-toms beat in the night, with a tale that the she-devil of the sea had found a mate, an iron man whose wrath was that of a wounded lion, and survivors of butchered Stygian ships named Belit with curses, warriors with fierce blue eyes. So, the Stygian princes remembered this man, long and long ago, and their memory was a bitter tree, which bore crimson fruit in the years to come. But heedless as a vagrant wind, the Tigris cruised the southern coast until she anchored at the mouth of a broad sullen river, whose banks were jungle-clouded walls. This is the river, which is death. Its waters are poisonous, see how dark and murky they run. Only venomous reptiles live in that river. The people shun it. Once a Stygian galley, fleeing from me, fled up the river and vanished. I anchored in this very spot, and days later the galley came floating down the dark water, its decks blood-stained and deserted. Only one man was on board, and he was mad, died gibbering. The cargo was intact, but the crew had vanished into silence and mystery. I believe there's a city somewhere on that river. I've heard tales of giant towers, walls glimpsed afar off by sailors who dared go part way up the river. But we fear nothing. Conan, let us go. Let us go and sack that city. Conan agreed. He generally agreed. Hers was the mind that directed their raids. His the arm that carried out her ideas. It mattered little to him where they sailed or whom they fought, so long as they sailed and fought. He found the life good. Battle and raid had thinned their crew. Only some 80 spearmen remained, scarcely enough to work the long galley. But Belit would not take the time to make long cruises southward to the island kingdom, where she recruited her buccaneers. She was afire with eagerness for her latest venture. So the Tigris swung into the river mouth, the oarsmen pulling strongly. They rounded the mysterious bend that shot out the side of the sea, and sunset found them forging steadily against the sluggish flow, avoiding sandbars where strange reptiles coiled. Not even a crocodile did they see, nor any foul-legged beast or winged bird coming down to the water's edge to drink. On through the blackness that preceded moonrise, they drove, between banks that were solid palisades of darkness, where there came mysterious rustlings of stealthy footfalls, and the gleam of grim eyes. And once an inhuman voice was lifted in awful mockery and a cry of an ape, adding to the souls of evil men were imprisoned in these man-like animals as punishment for past crimes. But Conan doubted for once. In a gold-barred cage in a Harkurian city, he had seen an abysmal, sad-eyed beast, which men told him was an ape. There had been about it naught of the demonic malevolence, which vibrated in the shrieking laughter that echoed from the black jungle. Then the moon rose, a splash of blood, and the jungle awoke in horrific bedlam to greet it. Roars, howls, and yells set the warriors to trembling. But all this noise, Conan noted, came from farther back in the jungle, as if the beasts no less than men shunned the waters. Rising from the sea, denseness of the trees and above waving fawns, the moon silvered the river. And their wake became a rippling scintillation of phosphorescent bubbles that widened like shining roads of bursting jewels. The oars dipped into the shining water, came up sheathed in frosty silver. The plumes on the warriors' headpieces nodded in the wind, and the gems on sword hilts and harness sparkled frostily. The cold light stuck icy fire from the jewels in Belit's clustered black locks. She clenched her lithe figure on a leopard skin thrown on the deck. Supported on her elbows, her chin resting on her slim hands, she gazed up into the face of Conan. His mane, the faintest breeze, and Belit's eyes were dark jewels burning in the moonlight. Mystery and terror are about us, Conan, and we glide into the realm of horror and death. Tell me you're not afraid. And a shrug came from him. Good. I'm not afraid either. I was never afraid. I have looked into the naked fangs of death too often, Conan. Do you fear the gods? The gods. I would tread on their shadow. Some gods are strong to harm, others to aid. At least so say the priests. Mitra of the Hyborians must be a strong god, because his people have builded their cities over the world. But even the Hyborians fear Set. What of your own gods? I have never heard you call on them. Their chief is Crom. He dwells in a great mountain. What use to call on him? Little he cares for men or lives. Better to be silent than to call his attention to you. He will send you dooms, and is grim, loveless. But at birth he breathes power, to strive and to slay in a man's soul. What of the worlds beyond the river of death? There's no hope here or hereafter in the cult of my people. In this world, men struggle and suffer vainly, finding pleasure only in the bright madness of battle. Dying, their souls enter a gray, misty realm of clouds and icy winds, to wander cheerlessly. Life, bad as it is better than such a destiny. What do you believe, Conan? I have known many gods. He who denies them is as blind as he who trusts them too deeply. And I seek not beyond death. It may be the blackness averred by the Nemedian skeptics, Crom's realm of ice and cloud, or the snowy plains and vaulted halls of Valhalla. I know not, nor do I care. But gods are real, Conan. And above all the gods of the Shemites, Ishtar, Ashtoreth, Kerto and Adonis, Bel too, Shemitish, for he was born in ancient Shumir, long ago, and went forth laughing, with curled beard, impish white eyes to steal the gems of the kings. There is life beyond death. I know, and I know this too, Conan the Cimmerian. My love is stronger than any death, and I have lain in your arms. You have held and crushed and conquered. My heart is wielded to your heart. My soul is part of your soul. Were I still in death, and you fighting for life, I would come back from the abyss to aid you. Whether my spirit floated with the purple sails on the crystal sea or paradise, or writhe in the molten flames of hell, I am yours, and all the gods and all their eternity shall not but serve us. A scream rang from the lookout on the bows. Thrusting Belit aside, Conan bounded up, his sword a long silver glitter in the moonlight, his hair bristling at what he saw. The warrior dangled above the deck, supported by what seemed a dark, pliant tree trunk arching over the rail. Then he realized that it was a gigantic serpent, which had writhed its glistening length of the side of the bow, and gripped the luckless warrior in its jaws. Its dripping scales shone leprously in the moonlight as it reared its form high above the deck, and while the stricken man screamed and writhed like a mouse in the fangs of a python, Conan rushed into the bows, and swinging his great sword, hewed nearly through the giant trunk, which was thicker than a man's body. Blood drenched the rails. The dying monster swayed far out, still gripping its victim, and sank into the river, coil by coil, lashing the water to bloody foam. Man and reptile vanished together. And thereafter, Conan kept a lookout watch himself, but no other horror came crawling from the murky depths. And as dawn whitened over the jungle, he sighted the black fangs of towers jutting up among the trees. He called Belit, who slept on the deck, wrapped in his scarlet cloak, and she sprang to his side, eyes blazing. Her lips were parted to call orders to her warriors to take up bow and spear. It was but the ghost of a city, on which they looked when they cleared a jutting, jungle-clad point they swung toward, incurving shores. Weeds and rank river, grass grew between the stones of broken piers and shattered paves that had once been streets and spacious piers. From all sides except toward the river, the jungle crept in, masking fallen columns and crumbling mounds with poisonous green. Here and there, buckling towers reeled drunkenly against the morning sky. Broken pillars jutted up among the decaying walls. In the center space, a marble pyramid was spired with a slime column, and on its pinnacle sat or squatted something Conan supposed to be an image, till his eyes detected life in it. "It's a great bird," said one of the warriors standing in the bows. "It's a monster. It's a monster bat," insisted another. "It's an ape," said Belit. And then the creature spread broad wings and flapped off into the jungle. "A winged ape? Better we had cut our own throats than come to this place." Belit mocked at his superstitions and ordered the gallery run inshore and tied to the crumbling wharves. She was the first to spring ashore, closely followed by Conan, and after them trooped the skinned pirates, white plumes waving in the morning wind, spears ready, eyes rolling dubiously at the surrounding jungle. Over all brooded a silence as sinister as that of a sleeping serpent. Belit poised picturesquely among the ruins, the vibrant life in her lithe fingers contrasting strangely with the desolation and decay about her. And the sun flamed up slowly, sullenly above the jungle, flooding the tower with a dull gold that left shadows lurking beneath the tottering walls. Belit pointed a slim round toward the reel on its rotting base. A broad expanse of cracked, grass-grown slabs led up to it, flanked by the falling columns, and before it stood a massive altar. Belit went swiftly among the ancient floors and stood before it. This was a temple of the old ones. Look, you can see the channels for the blood along the sides of the altar. The rains of 10,000 years have now washed the dark stains from them. The walls have all fallen away, but this stone block defies time and the elements. Who are these old ones? Said Conan. Not even in the legendary is the city mentioned. But look at the handholds at either side of the altar. Priests often concealed their treasures beneath their altars. 4 of you. Lay hold. See if you can lift it. She stepped back to make room for them, glancing up at the tower which loomed drunkenly above them. The 3 of the strongest people gripped the handholds, cut into the stones curiously unsuited for human hands. And when Belit sprang back with a sharp cry, they froze in place, and Conan, bending to aid them, wheeled with a startled curse. A snake in the grass. And Conan came quickly toward her, another taking his place. As he impatiently scanned the grass for reptiles, the giant people braced their feet, grunted and heaved with a huge muscle coiling, straining under the Ebon's skin. The altar did not come off the ground, but it revolved suddenly on its side, and simultaneously there was a grinding rumble. The tower came crashing down, covering the people with broken masonry, and a cry of horror rose from the comrades. And Belit's slim fingers dug into Conan's arm muscle. There was no serpent. It was but a ruse to call you away. The old ones guarded their treasures well. Let us clear away the stones. With Herculean labor, they did so, lifted out the mangled bodies of the 4 men, and under them, stained in their blood, the pirate found a crypt carved in the solid stone. The altar hinged curiously with stone rods and sockets on one side. At first, they glanced at the crypt. It seemed brimming with liquid fire, catching the early light with a million blazing facets. Undreamable wealth lay before the eyes of the gaping pirates. Diamonds, rubies, bloodstones, sapphire, turquoise, moonstones, opals, emeralds, amethysts, unknown gems. And the crypt was filled to the brim with bright stones that the morning sun struck into lambent flame. And with a cry, Belit dropped to her knees among the blood-stained rubble. And on the brink, she thrust her arms, her shoulder deep into the pool of splendor. She withdrew them, clutching something that brought another cry to her lips. A long string of crimson stones that were clots of frozen blood, strung on thick gold wire. And in their glow, the golden sunlight changed to a bloody haze. Belit's eyes were like a woman's in a trance. The Shemite soul finds a bright drunkenness in riches, material splendor, and the sight of this treasure might have shaken the soul of the sated emperor Sushu. Take up the jewel, dogs! Her voice was shrill. Look! A muscular man stamped toward the tigers, and Belit wheeled, her crimson lips a snarl as if she expected to see a rival courser sweeping into the spoil. But from the gunwales of the ship, a dark shape rose, soaring away over the jungle. The devil ape! The devil ape is aboard the ship! What matters? Cried Belit, raking a black rebellious lock with an impatient hand. Make a leader of spears, mantles to bear these jewels. Where the devil are you going? I'm going to look to the galley. That thing might have knocked a hole in the bottom for all we know. He ran swiftly down the cracked wharf and sprang aboard. A moment's swift examination below decks, and he swore heartily, casting a clouded glance in the direction of a bat-beating hand. He returned hastily to Belit, superintending the plundering of the crypt. She had looped the necklace about her neck, and on her naked bosom the red clots glimmered darkly. A huge naked black stood crotch deep in the jewel-brimming crypt, scooping up great handfuls of splendor that passed into eager hands above. The strings of frozen iridescence hung between his dusky fingers, and drops of red dripped from his hands, piled high with starlight and rainbows, as if it was a titan who stood straddle-legged in the bright pits of hell, his lifted hands full of stars. That flying devil has starved in the water casks. If we hadn't been so dazed by these stones, we'd have heard the noise. We were fools not to have left a man on guard. We can't drink this river water. It'll take 20 men. She looked at him vaguely, in her eyes the blank blaze of her strange passion. Very well. I'll get the loot aboard. And the jungle closed quickly about them. The underbrush not so thick Conan as anticipated. The ground was spongy and slushy. Away from the river it sloped gradually upwards. Go ahead. March straight on, till you can no longer see me. Stop. Wait for me. I believe we're being followed. I heard something. Conan recoiled. But already he felt a subtle lethargy stealing over him, and he sought to lift his sword. He hewed down the serpentine stalks, but his arm hung lifeless at his side, and he opened his mouth to shout to his warriors, but only a faint rattle issued. The next instant, with appalling suddenness, the jungle waved and dimmed out before his eyes. He did not hear the screams that burst out awfully, not that far away, where his knees collapsed, letting him pitch limply to the earth. And above his prostrate form, the great blossoms nodded in the windless air. Part 3. The Horror in the Jungle. First there was the blackness of an utter void, the cold winds of cosmic space blowing through it. Then shapes, vague, monstrous, and evanescent, rolled in dim panorama through the expanse of nothingness, as if the darkness were talking in material form. And the wind blew and a vortex formed, a whirling pyramid of roaringness. And from it grew shape and dimension. Then suddenly, like clouds dispersing, the darkness rolled away on either hand, and a huge city, dark green stone, rose on the bank of a wide river, flowing through illimitable paths. Through this city moved beings of alien configuration, and cast in the mold of humanity, they were not men. They were winged and of heroic proportion, not a branch on the mysterious stalk of evolution that culminated in man, but the ripe blossom of an alien tree, separate and apart from that stalk. And aside from their wings and physical appearance, they resembled man only as a man in his highest form resembles the great apes. In spiritual, aesthetic, and intellectual development, they were superior to man, as man is superior to the gorilla. But when they reared their colossal city, man's primal ancestors had not yet risen from the slime of the primordial sea. These beings were mortal, as are all living things built of flesh and blood. They lived, loved, and died through the individual span of life. And that span was enormous. And then after uncounted millions of years, the change began. The vista shimmered and wavered like a picture thrown on a wind-blown curtain. And over the city and land the ages flowed as waves flow over a beach. And each wave brought alliterations. Somewhere on the planet, the magnetic centers were shifting. The great glaciers and ice fields were withdrawing. And the littoral of the great river altered. Plains turned into swamps that stank the reptilian life. Where fertile meadows had rolled, forests reared up, growing in the dark jungles. And the changing ages wrought on the inhabitants of the city as well. They did not migrate to fresher lands. Reasons inexplicable to humanity held them to the ancient city and their doom. And as that once rich and mighty land sank deeper and deeper into the black mire of the sunless jungle, so into the chaos of squalling jungle life sank the people of the city. Terrific convulsions shook the earth. The nights were lurid with spouting volcanoes that fringed the dark horizons with red pillars. And after an earthquake that shook down the outer walls, the highest towers of the city, caused the river to run back for days with some lethal substance spewed up from the subterranean depths. A frightful chemical change became apparent in the waters the folk had drunk for millennial discounts. Many died who drank of it, and in those who lived, the drinking wrought change, subtle, gradual, and grisly. And adapting themselves to the changing conditions, they had sunk far below their original level. But the lethal waters altered them even more horribly. From generations to more bestial generations, who had been winged gods, became pinioned demons. And with all that remained of their ancestors' vast knowledge distorted, perverted, twisted in ghastly paths. And as they had risen higher than mankind might dream, so they sank lower than man's maddest nightmare reach. They died fast by cannibalism. Horrible feuds fought out in the murk of the midnight jungle. And at last, among the lichen-grown ruins of their city, only a single shape lurked. A stunted, abhorrent perversion of nature. And then, for the first time, humans appeared. Hawk-faced men in rubber and copper, leather harnesses, bearing bows. The warriors of prehistoric Stygia. There were only 50 of them. They were haggard and gaunt with starvation and prolonged effort, stained and scratched with jungle wandering, with blood-crusted bandages that told of fierce fighting. In their minds was a tale of warfare and defeat, flights before a stronger tribe which drove them even southward, till they lost themselves in green oceans of jungle and river. Exhausted, they laid down. Among the ruins were red blossoms that blood. But once a century waved in the full moon, and sleep fell upon them. And as they slept, a hideous shape crept red-eyed from the shadows, performed weird, awful rites about and above each sleeper. The moon hung in the shadowy sky, painting the jungle red and black, and above the sleepers glimmered with crimson blossoms, like splashes of blood. And then the moon went down, and the eyes of the necromancer were red jewels set in the ebony of night. When the dawn spread its white veil over the river, there were no men to be seen, only a hairy winged horror that squatted in the center of a ring of 50 great spotted hyenas that pointed quivering muzzles to the ghastly sky and howled like souls in hell. Then scene followed scene so swiftly that each tripped over the heels of its predecessor. There was a confusion of movement, a writhing, melting of lights and shadows, green stone ruins and murky rivers. Men came up the river in long boats with skulls grinning on the prows, or stole stooping through the trees, spears in hand. They fled screaming through the dark, red eyes, slavering fangs. Howls of dying men shook in the shadows. Stealthy feet padded through the gloom. Vampire eyes blazed redly. There were grisly feasts beneath the moon, across whose red disk a bat-like shadow incessantly swept. Then abruptly, etched clearly in contrast to these impressionistic glimpses, around the jungle point in the whitening dawn, swept a long galley, thronged with shining figures, and in the bows stood a white-skinned ghost in blue steel. It was at this point that Conan first realized he was dreaming. Until that, he had no consciousness of individual existence. But as he saw himself treading the boards of the Tigris, he recognized both the existence and the dream, although he did not awaken. And even as he wondered, the scene shifted abruptly to a jungle glade where Nagora and the 19 spearmen stood, as if awaiting someone. And even as he realized that it was he for whom they waited, a horror swooped down from the skies, and their stolidity was broken by yells of fear. Like men maddened by terror, they threw away their weapons and raced wildly through the jungle, pressed close by the slavering monstrosity that flapped its wings above them. Chaos and confusion followed this vision, during which Conan feebly struggled awake. Dimly he seemed to see himself lying under a nodding cluster, while from the bushes a hideous shape crept toward him. With savage effort, he broke the unseen bonds which held him to his dream, and he started upright. Bewilderment was in the glare he cast about him. Near him swayed the dusky lotus, and he hastened to draw away from it. In the spongy soil near, there was a track, as if an animal had put out a foot, preparatory to emerging from the bushes, and then withdrew. He yelled for Nagora. Primordial silence brooded over the jungle, in which his yell sounded brittle and hollow, almost like mockery. He could not see the sun, but his wilderness-trained instinct told him the day was near its end. A panic rose in him as he thought that he had lain senseless for hours, and he hastily followed the tracks of the spearmen, which lay plain in the damp loam before him. They ran in single file, and he soon emerged out of the glade. Two stopped short, the skin crawling between his shoulders as he recognized as the glade he had seen in the lotus-drugged dream. Shields and spears lay scattered, as if dropped by headlong flight. And from the tracks which led from the glade, and deeper into the fastness, Conan knew that the spearman had fled wildly. The footprints overlay one another. They weaved blindly among the trees. And with startling suddenness, the hastening Cimmerian came out of the jungle onto a hill-like rock which sloped steadily, to break off abruptly in sheer precipice 40 feet high. Something crouched on the brink. At first Conan thought it was a great black gorilla. Then he saw that it was a giant man, crouching ape-like, long arms dangling. It was not until, with a sobbing cry, the creature lifted huge hands and rushed toward him. He realized it was his friend. With the skin crawling with the horror that madness always instills in the sane, Conan passed his sword through the man's body. Then, avoiding the hooked hands that clawed at him, Nagora sank down and strode to the edge of the cliff. For an instant he stood looking down into the jagged rocks below, where lay Nagora, a spearman, in limp, distorted attitudes that told of crushed limbs and splintered bones. No one moved. A cloud of huge black flies buzzed loudly above the blood-splashed stones. The ants had already begun to gnaw at the corpses. On the trees about sat birds of prey, a jackal, looking up and seeing the man on the cliff slunk furtively away. For a little space Conan stood motionless. Then he wheeled and ran back the way he had come, fleeing himself with reckless haste through the tall grass and bushes, hurdling creepers that sprawled snake-like across his path. His sword swung low in his right hand, an unaccustomed pallor tinged with his dark face, and the silence that reigned in the jungle was not broken. The sun set, great shadows rushed upwards from the slime of the black earth, and through the gigantic shades of lurking death and grim desolation, Conan was a speeding glimmer of scarlet and blue steel. No sound in all the solitude was heard except his own quick panting as he burst from the shadows into the dim twilights of the river shore. He saw the galley shouldering the rotten wharf, the ruins reeling drunkenly in the gray half-light. Here and there among the stones were spots of raw, bright color, as if careless hands had splashed with a crimson brush. Again, Conan looked on death and destruction. Before him lay his spearman, and he did not salute him. From the jungle edge to the riverbank, among the rotting pillars along the broken piers they lay, torn, mangled, half-devoured, all chewed travesties of men. And all about the bodies and the pieces of bodies were swarms of huge footprints like those of hyenas. Conan came silently out of the pier, approaching the gallery above whose deck was suspended. Speechless, the Cimmerian looked at the queen of the Black Coast. She hung from the yard arm of her own galley. And between the yard and her white throat stretched a line of crimson clots that shone like blood in the gray light. Part 4. The Attack from the Air. Why he had been spared for so long he did not understand. And lest the malign entity which ruled the river meant to keep him alive to torture him with grief and fear. All pointed to a human or superhuman intelligence, the breaking of water castes to divide their forces, the driving of the people over the cliff, the last and greatest, the grim jest of the crimson necklace knotted like a hangman's noose about Bolit's neck. And having apparently saved the Cimmerian, but the choicest victim, and exacted the last ounce of exquisite mental torture, it was likely that the unknown enemy would conclude the drama by sending him after their own victims. No smile lit Conan's grim lips as he thought, but his eyes were lit with an iron laughter. The moon rose, striking fire from the Cimmerian's horned helmet. No call awoke the echoes, yet suddenly the night grew tense, and the jungle held its breath. And instinctively Conan loosened the great sword from its sheath. The pyramid on which he rested was four-sided. One, the side toward the jungle carved in broad steps. In his hand was a Shemite bow, such as Belit might have taught her pirates to use. A heap of arrows lay at his feet, feathered ends toward him, and he rested on one knee. Something moved in the blackness under the tree, etched abruptly in the rising moon, and Conan saw a darkly blocked out head and shoulders brutish in outline, and now from the shadows cast shapes, silently, swiftly, running low. 20 great spotted hyenas. Their slavering fangs flashed in the moonlight. Their eyes blazed as no true beast's eyes ever blazed. 20. Then the spears of the pirates had taken toll of the pack. Even as he thought this, Conan drew knock to his ear, and the twangs of the string, a flame-eyed shadow bounded high and felt writhing. The rest did not falter. On they came, and like a rain of death, among them fell the arrows of the Cimmerian, driven with all the force and accuracy of steely throws backed by a hate hot as the slag heaps of hell. And in his berserk fury he did not miss. The air was filled with feathered destruction. The havoc wrought among the outrushing pack was breathtaking. Less than half of them reached the foot of the pyramid. Others dropped upon the broad steps. Glaring down into the blazing eyes, Conan knew these creatures were not beasts. It was not merely in their unnatural size that he sensed a blasphemous difference. They exuded an aura, tangible as the black mist rising as the corpse-littered swamp. By what godless alchemy these beings had brought into the existence he could not guess, but he knew he faced diabolism, blacker than the well of Skelos. Then, the rest were on him. In a nightmare rush of blazing eyes and dripping fangs, his fiercely driven sword shore the first asunder. The desperate impact of the other bore him down. He crushed a narrow skull with the pommel of his hilt, feeling the bone splinter, and blood and brain gush over his hands. Then dropping the sword useless to such deadly close quarters, he caught at the throats of the two horrors, ripping and tearing in silent fury, and a foul acrid scent almost stifled him. His own sweat blinded him. Only his mail saved him from being ripped to ribbons in an instant. The next, he locked a hairy throat and tore it open. His left hand, missing the throat of the other beast, caught its broken foreleg. As he reeled on wide-braced legs, sobbing for breath, the jungle swimming bloodily into his sight, the thrash of bat wings were loud in his ears. Stooping, he groped for his sword, swaying upright, braced with feet drunkenly and heaved from great blades above his head, both hands. Shaking from the blood of his eyes, he sought the air above him as his foe. Instead of attack from the air, the pyramid staggered suddenly and awfully beneath his feet. He heard a rumbling crackle and saw the tall column above him wave like a wand, stung to a galvanized life. It bounded far out. His feet hit a step halfway down, which rocked beneath him, and his next desperate leap carried him clear. But even as his heels hit the earth, the shattering crash like a breaking mountain, the pyramid crumpled. The column came thundering down in a bursting fragment, Like a blind cataclysmic instant, the sky seemed to rain shards of marble. Conan stood, stirred, throwing off splinters that half covered him. Then, something swept down across the stars and struck the sword near him. Twisting about, he saw it. The winged one. And with fearful speed, it was rushing upon him. And in that instant, Conan had only confused impression of a gigantic, man-like shape hurling along the bowed and stunted legs. A huge hairy arm outstretching, misshapen nailed paws, a malformed head, and whose broad face the only features recognizable as such are a pair of blood-red eyes. It was such a thing neither man nor beast nor devil imbued with characteristics. But Conan had no time for conscious consecutive thought. He threw himself toward his fallen sword, and his clawing fingers missed it by inches. Desperately he grasped the shards which pinned his leg. The veins swelled in his temple, and he strove to thrust off to him. He gave slowly, but he knew that before he could free himself, the monster would be upon him, and he threw those black taloned hands with death. And the headlong rush of the winged one had not wavered. It towered over the prostrate Cimmerian like a black shadow, arms thrown wide, glimmer of white flashes beneath its victim. Conan screamed, and then she flashed a quick glance at him, and in her dark eyes her loving flame, a naked elemental thing of raw fire and molten lava. Then she was gone, and the Cimmerian saw only the winged fiend who had staggered back in unwanted fear, arms listed as if to tend off attack, and he knew that Belit, in truth, lay on her pyre in the tigress deck. But in his ears rang her passionate cry, and with a terrible cry, he heaved upward, hurling the stones aside, and the winged one came again. Conan sprang to meet him, his veins on fire with madness. The throws started off like cords of his forearm, as he swung his great sword, pivoting on his heel with the force of the sweeping arc. Just above the hips, it caught the hurtling shape, and the knotted legs fell away. Conan stood in the moonlit silence, the dripping sword sagging in his hand, staring down at the remnants of his enemy, and the red eyes glared up at him with awful life, and glazed and set. The great hands nodded spasmodically, and then stiffened, and the oldest race in the world was extinct. Conan lifted his head, mechanically searching for the beast, things that had been its slaves and executioners, but nothing met his gaze. Bodies he saw, littering the moon-splashed grass, men, not beasts, hawk-faced, transfixed by arrows or mangled by sword strokes, and they were crumbling into dust before his eyes. Turning on his heel, the Cimmerian strode down the rotting wharf and stepped aboard the galley. A few strokes of his sword cut her adrift, and he went to the sweephead. The tigress rocked slowly in the sullen water, sliding out sluggishly toward the middle of the river, until the broad current caught her, and Conan leaned on the sweep, his somber gaze fixed on the cloak-wrapped shape that lay in the state on the pyre, the richness of which was equal to the ransom of an entire empire.